Most people don't avoid hard truths because they lack the courage to face them. They avoid them because they've already understood, quietly, precisely, without quite admitting it, and that understanding arrived before they were ready to do anything with it. This is the brutal reality that almost never gets named accurately. Not ignorance, not fear in any simple sense, something more deliberate than both. Avoidance, in its most sophisticated form, doesn't feel like running. It feels like patience, like being careful, like the reasonable decision to wait until the moment is right, a moment that upon examination never quite arrives. The life a man is currently living was not only shaped by what he was willing to face, it was shaped, perhaps more precisely, by what he found intelligent reasons not to. Most men never identify the moment they began lying to themselves, because the lie arrived wearing the face of wisdom. There was no collapse, no dramatic failure of nerve. There was simply a decision that needed to be made about a direction, a version of himself he had already outgrown, a situation he already understood, and it wasn't made. Not because he lacked the capacity, but because the mind, when it encounters a truth it isn't ready to confront, doesn't manufacture obvious denial. It manufactures patience. It constructs a story in which waiting is the intelligent choice, in which restraint signals maturity, not avoidance, in which not yet is a strategy rather than a symptom. The story is coherent. It draws on real considerations, stability, timing, not wanting to disrupt things unnecessarily. The language isn't wrong exactly. It serves a second purpose he hasn't named to himself. And he hasn't named it not because he can't see it, but because seeing it would require him to do something about it. This is where the dark psychology of self-deception operates most effectively, not in grand rationalizations, but in the small daily decision to emphasize one truth and not examine another. He isn't deceiving anyone else. He is selecting which truth to hold up to the light and which to file quietly away under something to address. There is a moment when this becomes visible. The patience expires. The situation he was managing by not managing it is still there, unchanged, except that time has compounded it. What was once a decision has become a more expensive version of the same confrontation, now carrying the additional weight of everything he did instead. He didn't wait himself into readiness. He weighted himself into a harder version of the same door. And he knows this, not loudly, but somewhere beneath the accumulated reasons, beneath the sensible explanations he has given himself and others, the knowledge is present, quiet, and patient in a way he is not. It has been there from the beginning. It waited while he waited. It is waiting still. The cinematic moment here is ordinary and precise. A man reads something, a message, a report, some reflection of his situation given back to him. He sets it down. He doesn't dismiss it. He files it under something to address. He moves on with his day. The camera, metaphorically, stays on his face a moment too long. Nothing is resolved. A man is not defined by the truths he cannot see. He is defined by the ones he saw clearly and found reasonable language to step around. That is not a failure of courage. It is something more precise than that. It is the particular intelligence of avoidance, the ability to construct a version of events in which the delay makes sense, in which the self-deception is dressed in the vocabulary of the self-aware. The brutal reality of the male mindset is this: the more capable the mind, the more elegant the silence it can build around what it already knows. There is a story most men have told more than once about their hardest period. It is not false. The facts are accurate. The sequence is correct. The emotions were real. And yet something in the telling has always been arranged, not to deceive, but to survive. The circumstances are present, the responses are reasonable, the outcome, however painful, arrives with a certain logic. What is missing is not a lie, it is a layer of honesty that was quietly set aside so early in the construction that it no longer feels absent. This is not a story about dishonesty. It is a story about what identity costs to maintain and how much it has been quietly charging without invoice. Most men recognize this mechanism in others before they recognize it in themselves. The colleague who, when given difficult feedback, always finds the element that is slightly imprecise, not to reject the feedback entirely, but to locate the inaccuracy with enough care that the core of it can be set aside without appearing to have been avoided. He doesn't dismiss what was said, he adjusts it, and in adjusting it, he preserves something the feedback was trying to revise. That is the pattern. It is almost invisible because it is almost reasonable every single time. The brutal reality beneath it is this: self-image does not protect a man from painful information. It processes painful information through a layer of interpretation that reliably produces the same conclusion, that whatever happened, the core of who he is remains intact. This is not vanity, it is a survival mechanism. The problem is that most survival mechanisms applied past their original context begin to cause the damage they were constructed to prevent. The defended self is not built from a man's best moments, it is built around the moments that required the most explanation, and those explanations, repeated across years, rehearsed across different relationships and different failures, eventually stop being explanations. They become identity. The story of why it wasn't quite his fault, why the circumstances were genuinely difficult, why any reasonable person would have done the same, this story does not just describe him, it has become him. Now think about the shape of your own narrative across your hardest periods. Not the content, the shape. Who acts and who responds. What is presented as choice and what is presented as circumstance. Whether the version of you that appears in your own account is someone things happen to or someone things proceed from. A man telling a close friend about a difficult chapter of his life. The account is smooth, not rehearsed but practiced, coherent without being rigid. The listener nods. Nothing in it is false, but somewhere beneath the warmth of the conversation, something has been omitted, not deliberately, not cruelly, simply because it has been omitted so many times it no longer registers as an absence. The listener feels it, the speaker, on some level, feels it too. Neither names it. The conversation ends well. That omission, accumulated over years, is not a flaw in the story, it is the story's purpose. A man cannot hold an honest account of his own behavior and a fully protected self-image at the same time. One of them is always the cost of the other. The question is not which one he has been paying, it is whether he has noticed the bill. There is a category of knowledge that does not feel like ignorance, and that is precisely what makes it so difficult to examine.
Not the things a man doesn't understand. Not the decisions that arrived without warning, that genuinely confused him, that required information he didn't have. Those carry a kind of innocence. Those can be forgiven without much effort. This is about a different category entirely. The things he saw clearly, the things he understood before the circumstances that required them even fully arrived. The conversations he already knew needed to happen, the direction he already knew needed to change, the pattern he had already, privately, accurately named, and left alone. Not from confusion, there was no confusion, not from fear alone. Fear at least implies engagement with the real obstacle. From something quieter than that, something more precise. There is a psychology to inaction that most content on brutal reality never examines directly, because examining it requires implicating the man himself, not as a victim of circumstance or limited information, but as someone who has made a relationship with his own clarity and chosen repeatedly not to be disturbed by it. Here is the mechanism beneath it. An unacted truth retains its full theoretical value. A man who has not yet had the conversation he knows needs to happen can still believe it would go well. A man who has not yet attempted the change he knows is necessary can still believe the change is possible. The inaction preserves something, not the future, the possibility of the future. And possibility, even false possibility, is more comfortable than a determined outcome. This is the comfort of incompletion. The difficult thing that hasn't been tried cannot have failed. The conversation not yet had cannot have gone badly. And so the most honest question is not why a man hasn't moved. It is what the unmoved state is still providing him, what it is still protecting, what door it is still holding open. At some point, awareness without action stops functioning as a step toward change. It begins functioning as a replacement for it. The man who has been aware of something for long enough learns to carry the awareness differently. It no longer demands a response. It becomes part of the background texture of his life, present, acknowledged, carefully not addressed. He is not confused by it. He has simply developed a fluency in moving around it that resembles, from a certain angle, preparation. He makes plans that approach the difficult thing without arriving at it. He refines his understanding of the problem, which is real and which feels like progress, without producing the action the understanding was supposedly preparing for. Some things are not avoided because change seems impossible. They are avoided because if change were attempted and failed, if the conversation happened and went badly, if the direction shifted and led nowhere, something currently available as comfort would no longer be. The belief in one's own potential requires that potential to remain untested. The most honest question a man can ask is not why he hasn't changed. It is what remaining unchanged has quietly been protecting him from. There is no crisis to point to. That is the first thing a man notices when he looks back honestly at a decade, not at a disaster, not at a single moment where everything changed, but at the general shape of things, the slow drift, the sense that certain possibilities, once available, have become less so, not because of what happened, because of what quietly accumulated in the space of what didn't. This is the compound cost of avoidance, and it is the most difficult kind to examine, precisely because it leaves no clear evidence. It looks like circumstance. It looks like timing. It looks like the natural shape of a life. It is not. Avoidance is a self-protecting structure. Not in any grand psychological sense, but in the simple, mechanical way that a pattern that produces no immediate consequence will not be interrupted by consequence. A single avoided conversation produces nothing visible for months. A single unaddressed tension in a relationship costs almost nothing in any given week. The feedback loop is long, deliberately long. Not long because the universe is indifferent, long because the mind that is avoiding something has an interest in the feedback not arriving clearly. This is the mechanism that makes the compound cost so effective as a form of self-deception. The damage does not look like damage. It looks like a series of ordinary moments that happen to lean a certain direction. A career that didn't quite go where it seemed to be heading. A relationship that became more comfortable and less true over time.
a version of a man that narrowed quietly across years, not from pressure, but from the consistent absence of the friction that would have kept him honest. He never felt it happen. That was the cost, working exactly as avoidance intended it to. There is a particular kind of biographical reckoning that arrives not in crisis, but in texture. A man sitting in a life that is not bad, not suffering, not broken, with the quiet awareness that the distance between what this feels like and what he once imagined is wider than he would have predicted. He is not unhappy enough to act. That too is part of the cost. The avoided truths did not disappear. They compounded. They became the environment. The relationship that needed a difficult conversation 3 years ago is now simply the relationship, and the conversation has not become easier, only older. The direction he chose not to correct is now simply the direction he is traveling. The version of himself he did not choose to examine has become, without announcement, the version others have adjusted to. No single moment is responsible. Hundreds of ordinary ones are. Here is the brutal reality that this lesson is built around, and it arrives quietly because that is the only way it arrives honestly. A man who has avoided a difficult truth for a long time has not spared himself a hard experience. He has traded one sharp cost for a slow, distributed version of the same cost, spread across years, embedded in texture, and therefore never quite painful enough to demand response. He chose the gradual version. Most do, not from cowardice, from a rational preference for the pain that doesn't feel like pain yet. What was not understood is that the gradual version, by the time it becomes visible, has already covered more ground. The harsh truth was never an event that could have been faced and finished. It was a direction, and directions left uncorrected long enough arrived somewhere regardless of whether the traveler intended the destination. The question is not what he avoided, it is how far that direction has already carried him, and whether the distance looks from where he is standing now like something that happened to him or something he quietly built one unconsidered day at a time. Nothing about your life looks different right now. The same obligations are waiting, the same half-formed intentions are where you left them, the same private understanding that the real shift, the honest confrontation, the actual beginning is still somewhere ahead, still intact, still available in roughly the shape you have been holding it. That belief is the one worth examining, because the brutal reality is not that men fail to see what their lives require. Most men see it clearly. The harsh truth lives one layer deeper, in the ordinary moment after seeing, when the delay arrives dressed as preparation, and the gap between understanding and motion quietly becomes another day, then another arrangement of the same days. The question is not whether you know what needs to change, it is how long you have already known.